Thank you, Pete. I'd really like to thank Pete and the Initiative for Public Choice and Market Process for having allowed me to be here today. Also, Carrie Messel for so graciously lending us your classroom. And just to let you know that I was struggling because I know that there's a bunch of different people here, and what I wanted to hopefully do was to be able to, at least in one way, attract and pique your interest with regards to what it is that I'm doing in Panama, and what does that have to do with Charleston in particular. And so in the time allotted, hopefully we'll wander over a few different topics, talk about free zones, we'll talk about history of Panama, we'll talk about free trade, we'll talk about the canal, we'll talk about why are cruise ships coming to Charleston and why should they or shouldn't they come to Charleston. And leadership, I think that's also very important, and then the future of free zones in Panama and in the world. And so what I'd like to start with is just to give you a little bit of context is talk about Panama. As you know, it's the narrowest part in the Western Hemisphere. And 500 years, as that slide says, is no lie. From the days of the conquistadors and Peruvian gold, it came through Panama on its way back to Spain in the 16th century. So it's been a place where things are going from one place to another place for over 500 years. Balboa discovered the Pacific. Discovered in the sense that a European person saw the Pacific for the first time from Panama. The West Indies, why are they called the West Indies? The Caribbean is known as the West Indies because, as you know, Columbus was sailing looking for Asia and the Spice Islands, and he ran into this piece of land that wasn't supposed to be there. So for 500 years, Panama has been a narrow spot in the Western Hemisphere, and because it's the narrowest place, geographically speaking, it's then been important. So what's the big deal about Panama? If you know your history, Panama as a country was born in 1903 basically as a result of a rebellion of some citizens who were a little bit upset with the fact that Colombia was not too amenable to developing trade in Panama. They felt like they were way too far away from Bogota, Colombia, the capital, and that they weren't paying attention to them. And so they decided to separate from Colombia, and basically the first thing they did was sign a treaty with the United States to build the canal. Now, again, if you know a little bit about your history, and if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this topic, I would point you to The Path Between the Seas. It's a book written by David McCulloch. And David McCulloch does a very good job of capturing those 500 years of history of Panama. I think it's very exciting, but obviously you would say, well, he's prejudiced about Panama. But I really think that you'll find it very interesting because it's a mix of the history as well as the politics behind what happened. And again, if we look at the history, the geographical advantage means that from the perspective of world trade, and again, what we have to think about is that the world is truly globalized, and you have to look at, and that's what I'm trying to point out here in these arrows, is that Asia, and let's not just say China anymore, because the context of China today, the perception is that China is the factory of the world. But if you read a little bit about trade, you'll realize that what's happened with the development of trade is that China has become more expensive. The China price is no longer as cheap as it used to be before, so that factories are moving to other areas outside of China. So we talk about Asia as the manufacturing platform for the world. So those goods are coming from that factory of the world to the places where they're being consumed. And I like to use the example of the fact that 50% of the trade through the Panama Canal is container vessels, and 70% of those container vessels are headed to the east coast of the United States. And where those ports are, and we'll elaborate a little bit more on that later, they could be Miami, they could be Jacksonville, it could be Savannah, it could be Charleston, it could be Hampton Roads, it could be Port Elizabeth, or any of those Gulf ports. So Panama was born globalized. The fact that the canal was there as basically our first big major project. It was inaugurated in 1914, so next year we'll be celebrating 100 years of having expanded the canal. And again, I'll elaborate a little bit more on the expansion, but we're hoping in 2015 to be able to add another lane to allow for larger vessels to go through. The US dollar. We don't have a different currency. This is the money that I use in Panama. It's the US dollar. So you don't have the problems of inflation that you would normally have in a country where there's a central bank that decides that they're going to print as many pieces of paper as are necessary to be able to fund whatever boondoggle it is that they're interested in funding. So the US dollar is legal tender, and I would say that that's one of the big reasons why we've had monetary stability and basically very low inflation for over 100 years. No natural disasters. Why is that a big deal? Yes, we're in the tropics, but we're outside of the hurricane belt, and we don't have major earthquakes. And again, part of the history of why the canal was built in Panama and not Nicaragua was because of the fact that Nicaragua is very prone to earthquakes. And the story in Path Between the Seas about why Nicaragua wasn't chosen by the United States Congress as the place to build a canal is a very interesting one. Financial center. Many people think that Panama is the New York of Latin America. We're 3.5 million people that live in this small country, so it's not a very big country at all, but because of the dollar and because of very far-sighted politicians and private businessmen in the 30s, it's become known as a place where you can set up companies. It's kind of the Delaware of Latin America, and with banks having set up there, it's also a very interesting place for multinational banks to set up. Legal and financial benefits, we're very pro-business, so it's very easy for a company to set up. In the free zone where I work, the clients that approach me that want to set up to be able to work in the free trade zone, it's typically a process that takes approximately 2 weeks to be able to start receiving goods. So it shocks a lot of people at how easy it is to get set up in the free trade zone to start working. Bilingual workforce, that's also very important. I would suggest to you who are language majors or who are not language majors, it's very important that you try and learn. Yes, English is the language of the world, but it's pretty nice when you can talk to somebody in their own language because it makes things a little bit easier. The expansion, it's a almost $6 billion project. And as I said, it's going to be ready in 2015. We've had a slight glitches with regards to the rains. It was hoped that it would be able to be inaugurated on the 100th anniversary, but the rains and the fact that the contract specified one cement that should last 100 years was found to be no joke by the contractor when he delivered his first batch, which didn't pass muster, and he was sent back to the drawing board. So that delayed a little bit the completion. The consolidation capabilities, the Colon Free Trade Zone, that's where I work. As Pete said, I've been 30 years working in the Colon Free Trade Zone, and it's very interesting to talk about the canal because that's what most people know when you say Panama. The Panama Canal employs 10,000 people, but the Free Trade Zone employs 30,000 people. So it's a little unknown fact that the Free Trade Zone, which was created in 1948 by the Colon Chamber of Commerce, a group of people who got together after the Second World War, who were very concerned that as a result of the end of the war, which was good for the world, bad for Colon, it meant that a significant drop-off in traffic and soldiers moving from one side to the other. So the Chamber of Commerce said, we need to create something that will provide for jobs that we've been losing as a result of the end of the Second World War. It's got a huge information infrastructure. Again, perception and reality. I've got 25 megabits in my house, and it's as fast an internet as you'll find this side of South Korea. Tourism and modern infrastructure, it's also a very nice place to visit. We've got great beaches. And this is a view of the skyline, which is something that really surprises a lot of people, is when they see the skyline for the first time, they can't imagine something that would look like that in Latin America, because your perception is that perhaps we're still in a banana republic economy. I wouldn't disabuse you of that notion, but we have developed a pretty incredible construction industry where what you'll see is, as a result of the fact of the concentration of land and the unavailability of expansion, we've grown up, and this building is the tallest building in Latin America, 50 stories high, and it pretty much towers over, and it's a residential building. The view from that penthouse is pretty spectacular. So, logistics infrastructure, that's the business that I do, and so I want to touch a little bit on those. This is a little bit closer look to what was formerly known as the Canal Zone. You have approximately 50 miles from one side to the other, from the Caribbean to the Pacific Ocean, and this gives you a view of what the canal looks like. The canal is basically 60% of it was created by damming this river, which starts over here and creates this freshwater lake. Why do we need the lake? Is because it's basically a hydraulic elevator. Boats are floated up to the canal level and then floated back down on the other side. And so it's about 88 feet that boat floats up. So you need water, and that's why for us it's a very important resource. As a matter of fact, the new locks that are coming online, just to give you an idea of the size of those locks, 3 Empire State Buildings would fit inside each one of those new locks that are coming online. But because of the engineering involved with reclaiming some of that water, it's actually going to use less water than the current locks. So there was a lot of thinking with regards to how can we make these sustainable in the times of the dry season when we don't get as much rain as we're getting right now. The international airport, Copa Airlines. Copa Airlines started out as a small domestic airline run by the government. It was privatized. Today it is one of the major airlines in Latin America, and they fly on a daily basis to Toronto in the north and Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile in the south on a daily basis. So as a result of that, we're moving over 4 million people out of this little airport in this little country. And I just mentioned that as a way of highlighting the fact that what we've tried to do is take advantage of our location in the middle of the Western Hemisphere to potentialize any business that will allow us to create more economic value within the country. DHL Aviation's also picked it as a hub, the free zone, and I'll go a little bit more into that. And then we have communications to the north. We don't have any communication to the south because there is no road between Panama and Colombia. It's still jungle, and politically we aim to keep it that way because what we don't want to do is see areas that are currently dominated by the FARC guerrilla movement in Colombia that would allow for some bleed over of that domestic conflict over into Panama. So this is another view. I grew up here on the Caribbean side. This is known as the Atlantic side. If you know your geography, the canal actually runs north-south. So you're northbound as you're coming from the Pacific towards the Caribbean, and anybody who's seen the canal transits, they'll typically come in at about 6 a.m. in the morning, and it takes them all day to come through the locks, and the whole process takes approximately 8 hours. This is Panama City, and as you can see, I was mentioning about the skyline, we were hemmed in with jungle because we need to keep the jungles for the rainfall. This was the Canal Zone, so we couldn't grow this way. So the city's basically grown along the coastline. This is a former U.S. Air Force base. At one time, right up to the invasion in 1989, we had over 20,000 U.S. troops that were stationed in the United States, and that was the headquarters for the Southern Command. So as a result of the handover in 2000, that went away, and we had the job of trying to use all of these former military bases to create them into areas. So the Colan Free Trade Zone is not the only free zone. There's another one over here. I'm working on another one at the airport. City of Knowledge, which is kind of a research triangle park initiative, has gone into another of the bases. So this has been a challenge since 2000. How do we use that former infrastructure effectively as a country? Gateway to the Americas. The fact that we have the canal, this is trying to highlight the fact that you can see what I was talking about earlier. Factory of the world, places where things come together and then they all come through together here. So what you see is the phenomenon of the motherships, the very large ships that are coming online now. The manufacturers of these vessels, the owners of these vessels, are what they're trying to do is they're trying to make the container cost as little as possible. So they want to put as many containers as possible, and that brings us a little bit later on into the dredging of the port of Charleston, why that's important. But this also helps to highlight the fact that because of the canal, because of our geography, because of our legislation, we've been able to create in Latin America, after Chile, one of the most bustling economies in Latin America as a result of the geographic position along with economic incentives. Okay, this is where I work. This is the Atlantic side. This is where I grew up. This was Cristobal High School. It was the high school on the Atlantic side when it was the Canal Zone. Now it's one of the major Latin American container ports. So I go have lunch every day in what used to be my high school, which is a pretty freaky experience because that's where I took English and that was where ROTC was. I mean, it's just pretty amazing, but that's what you can see here is that this was a former high school, and then now it moves approximately 6 million containers a year. So what you've got here is the free zone, which started in this little corner of the city of Colan in 1948, and today is expanded into this area, approximately 2,000 acres worth of businesses, as I said, 30,000 people working there, and 15 billion in turnover. So what's my business? I work in what's known professionally as third-party logistics. What's third-party logistics? That means that we have warehouses and people who receive goods for Procter & Gamble. That's one of our most recent clients. So that battery from China will come in a container and we'll receive it in a warehouse right here, where it crosses the street from the port into the warehouse, and then we'll unload that container, and then we will load it on the outbound side along with Crest and Herbal Essence and Tide on the outbound side going to Latin America, from Mexico all the way to Argentina. So what Procter & Gamble found was that this was a pretty unique place where from their 33 factories around the world, they could bring everything into a central location. And then what we would do is unload it on one side and load it out on the other side. Why is that a big deal? Because before this facility, the client in Venezuela, say, would have to order a complete container. A complete container of one type of battery is a lot of batteries. So if you don't want to have that much inventory, as you know, having to hold too much inventory means that you've got money tied up, and what you want to do is have the least amount of inventory possible so that you can get replenished as quickly as possible. So now with this facility, what that means is that you no longer have to worry about ordering a full container. You just have to order a box. And you know that next week, if you need 2 more boxes, that's what you'll order, and we'll send you 2 more boxes next week. And then that way, you're obviously keeping your inventory in a container on the way to you rather than having a warehouse in the back full of product that's not moving because suddenly your demand is not there. So, as I said, I'm president of the Free Zone Users Association, and what I find that most of our job is trying to lobby the government to understand the realities of that this place is successful because the incentives that were put into place, and one of my favorite sayings is people respond to incentives. The incentive of a free zone where you can bring product together and it's important that you understand that the fiscal concept of Panama is that if you make any profits outside of Panama, as far as the government is concerned, those profits are tax-free because they're only interested in business that occurs within the boundaries of the Republic of Panama. Why is that interesting? Because goods that are sold out of the free zone into Venezuela don't pay any taxes on those profits. So what that's allowed to do, and the reason why the skyline of Panama City looks like is that as a result of $15 billion worth of movement, it's estimated that leaves approximately $1 billion in profits that are reinvested in the economy. So that it's not just the visible of the free zone and 30,000 people, but it's also the banking industry that's been created because of free zone profits, construction that's been created as a result of free zone profits, so that it's estimated that the impact of the free zone and the logistics industry on the economy of Panama is approximately 30% of GNP. So what is it about free zones that is so interesting? And part of the history of free zones, and really the reason why this occurred, is because what we did was a copy-paste of the FTZ laws of the United States. From 1933 in the United States, there's been an FTZ law that allows for a company to set up a place where those goods can come in and they only pay duties and taxes at the moment that they're consumed. So you're parking inventory in this free zone that you don't necessarily know where it's going to go to. From here, we're re-exporting out into Latin America, 28 different countries, and so we're keeping inventory here that can be resent out on a weekly basis, and what that means is that the companies then can be resupplied, and so that's why the free zone as a concept, which I don't know if you knew, there's approximately 200 free zones in the United States, and around the world, what we did was, along with Dubai and other places like Hong Kong, copy that same idea to create this industry. So, as I said, the Colon Chamber of Commerce said, let's do something like this, and I don't think that they, in their wildest dreams, imagined what would occur, because as a result of the free zone, the canal runs along here. This is a port, this is a port, this is a port. These are warehouses. This is an airport that just was inaugurated approximately 1 month ago. And then we have a 4-lane road that goes off towards Central America. So what you've got in one location, and that's why I like this picture, it gives you an idea of the power of the network effect of multimodal sites, and multimodal only means different modes of transport. You've got rail right here, the airport, ports, trucking, so that you get it all together, and the idea is you want to speed inventory to move as quickly as possible. So the Canal Expansion, why is that important for South Carolina? As I said, there's several ports that are vying for being the destination, but one thing that you have to take into account is that those vessels are so large that they're not going to go everywhere. They're going to have to pick one place where to stop. And so the big question for Charleston is, are we going to be that place that we want to stop at, or will it be Hampton Roads, or will it be Savannah, or will it be Port Elizabeth? So that there's different opportunities that need to be considered, and I know that right now local government is very involved in conversations regarding what the dredging issues are, and we were talking at lunch about the fact that dredging might disturb the ecosystem, and it's certainly going to create a lot of new additional traffic were it to go through for being a receptor to one of these mega vessels that are going to be coming in, so that it's very important to take into account, if those boats are going to be coming through this canal, do we necessarily want them to stop at Charleston, and what are the effects of having to stop here, and what are we going to have to invest in having them stop here, because it goes beyond just dredging. It also means the infrastructure, the warehousing, the rail, and all of those investments that need to occur. So these are topics that need to be considered, and I think that the considerations need to be driven more by data than emotions. I was talking to Pete at lunch. that the data out there doesn't necessarily show that, for instance, cruise ship traffic here has meant an enormous spike economically for Charleston. So that's the type of issues and analyses that need to occur to determine whether that's necessarily a good thing. You would think that a bunch of people coming off of the boat is necessarily going to be important, but if you know anything about the cruise ship trade in the Caribbean, most of those get off of the boat, they're all inclusive, they're going to buy a t-shirt, and then they're going to go back on board. And so what is the impact of having bought thousands of t-shirts on the economy versus having to dredge the harbor or do any of the mitigations that are implied by these new investments that are going to come in? So the canal expansion, as I said, it presents some challenges for Charleston. I see Savannah, from the analyses that I've been able to make, pretty much farther along in the discussion with regards to, are they ready for these big boats? Savannah, a long time ago, has already become a preferred destination for Maersk Line, even though it's 11 miles of ocean and 23 miles of the Savannah River to get to the warehouses. But they've got the warehouses. The Georgia Economic Development Council has done a good job at trying to create the areas around the port to be able to have those big boxes. So the jury's still out on where that's going to happen, and so I would just leave that as a question mark, a big question mark. Is it necessarily a good idea to invest the amounts that are going to be required to make Charleston one of those go-to points? Because not everybody's going to win, even though all of those ports are trying to shake the federal money tree to be able to get the investments necessary to make it happen. So one of the things that I was asked to talk about is leadership. And one of the things that, as Pete was reading off the curriculum, and one of the lunch guests was asking me, how do you have enough time to do all those things that you're involved in? And my first answer was a patient wife. I think that's a big deal. We've been married 30 years, and she understands that it's great to pursue your passions. And one of the passions that I've been developing is the fact that you can't complain about a situation unless you're willing to do something about it. And so one of the reasons why I'm here is because I got involved in the Fundación Libertad in Panama, which promotes a free society. And the Initiative for Public Choice and Market Processes is also an organization that I follow very closely and very interested in that as well. Because what we realize is that if you're in a position of leadership, you need to be able to use it wisely and to be able to shape public opinion with regards to what you think your views are and how those can affect the economic situation of your society, be it at the micro level of a city or a county or even the country. And fortunately in Panama, it's such a small country, 3.5 million people, that everybody knows everybody. So it allows for an opportunity to be able to talk to the highest levels of government and try and make your pitch. And so to make your pitch, you have to be well-informed, and well-informed means you have to study. And studying goes on after college. And one of the big things that I learned was that unfortunately, none of the things that I'm reading about now, nobody explained them to me in college. And so what I've had to do is pretty much a self-directed master's degree in economics, where I've had to learn about economics, which when I was in college I thought was a rather dry subject, and Econ 101 can be heavily influenced by who your teacher is and what the textbook that he picks on. Because I think Robert Samuelson is probably one of the worst textbook examples that I've ever heard of trying to be able to explain economics, because at the end of the day, economics, and this is something that I've realized over the last 4 years that I've been heavily involved in reading about it, economics at the end of the day is what you do when you reach into at the 7-Eleven to buy a Pepsi instead of a Coke. That's an economic decision. And so that the aggregate of all of our economic decisions is what makes up an economy, and it makes it very interesting, and I've become very passionate about it because I realized that I needed to make up for 30 years of going around in my gut understanding that what I was doing was good for society, but not having the intellectual framework to be able to understand it, number one, because you have to understand it, and number two, to be able to explain it. So trying to explain it is why I'm kind of excited to be in front of a group of people like yourselves, because what I try to do is transmit a little bit of that passion and be able to listen to questions and be able to sharpen the discourse. Because, again, at the end of the day, I was pretty blind about the fact that economic decisions are important for a society, and so what I've tried to do is make up for that over these last 4 years of reading. And so I would invite you to reach out to Pete and the Initiative for Public Choice and Market Processes, because there's a wealth of material out there that would allow you to be able to dig a little bit more deeply on those topics and to be able to learn a little bit more about why a good economy is good for society. And perhaps I would also end with trying to explain a little about the Economic Freedom Index of the world, which is something that in Panama we're working on. Our big project in Panama with the Fundación Libertad is to try and take apart the index for Panama and what is it that we're doing well, but more importantly, what is it that we're doing wrong that we could help as developing public policy that would serve as suggestions for our candidates. We've got elections coming up in May of 2014, where we have 3 different candidates who are trying to become president of Panama. And as a result of this work that we'll be doing in a workshop on the 26th of October, about 60 people from different areas of Panama and different areas of the society, we're going to sit down and we're going to take apart that economic index, and we're going to look at it in a great level of detail over the whole day to be able to develop some consensualized, I'm not sure if that's a word, the consensus of the group, because we're going to have different views regarding the topics. But what we would hope to do is develop a policy paper that we could say to those politicians, look, here's the recipe. If you follow this, it's been proven over the last 25 years that countries that follow the model to try to increase their ranking in the index will be able to ensure a better living for their society, for their citizens. And one of the data points that really strikes me is that the difference between the better countries in that index and the not so good countries in that index has been estimated to mean a difference in 20 years in life expectancy. If you live in a less free economy, you've got 20 years probability of living 20 years less than you would in a more free economy. And to put that in the context of what does 20 years mean, that's a generation. That means not getting to know your grandfather in a less free economy than in a more free economy. And I think for all of us who have fond memories of our grandparents, not getting to know my grandparents would have been a terrible tragedy. So with that, I'd like to open it up, because more than monologues, I'm a great believer in the Socratic method, and I think the folks at lunch had some really good questions, and please don't feel inhibited. There are no stupid questions. I just want to be able to say that at the end of this time that you spent with us, you know a little bit more about Panama, you know a little bit more about free zones, and perhaps a little bit more about liberty. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
How does the Panamanian free zone regulate itself with regards to social accountability?
How does the free zone regulate itself with regards to social accountability? Now, social accountability, I think it's a very broad topic. So we have to try and define what social accountability means. And it really means something different to a lot of different people. At the end of the day, the city of Colan, and that's another presentation that I have, is, and maybe we could do that presentation, because I think it was precisely your question was what I was in Guatemala doing with a Startup Cities conference, Because the city of Colan, if you contrast it, this area here, who's seen the movie Quantum of Solace? James Bond movie. That was filmed in Panama. What was, and why did the producers like that place? Was because it allowed them to do different countries. And what did they pick to depict Haiti? Was this area here. If you look at some of those pictures, it's some of the most rundown areas, and it's been part of the challenge that we as a free zone have been wrestling with for the whole 30 years that I've been there, because a lot of people point to the poverty in Colan as being our fault because we're on the other side of the wall, and it's an enormously successful operation in the middle of an area that was depicted as Haiti. And why is that not something that you guys are concerned about? And my question has always said is that what we need to do is tear down the wall and create the opportunities that exist on this side of the wall, in this side of the area, because this is 40 years of government ineptitude where social investment is non-existent, investment in infrastructure, housing, they've just basically let it fall down. So I'm working on an initiative to extend the free zone into this area and create something along the lines of Freeport, Bahamas as a port destination. This is a cruise ship port right here. So we've got a weekly sailing starting in October that go around 2 different routes around the Caribbean. So what I'm trying to do is replicate the success on this side of the wall and this side of the success of the wall, so that would be my answer is, how do we deal with it is create more jobs, because at the moment that you create jobs, you're creating opportunities and you're allowing for people to take care of themselves and their families. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, ma'am.
So this is in regards, you were talking a bit earlier about the aspects of free trade and how you said that industries, when they make profit outside of Panama, that profit is not taxed. Is that right? Yeah.
Do you want me to expand on that, or do you?
Well, I really was just wondering about how does that affect domestic small businesses like Panamanians, you say? If their profit is there, if they don't have the benefits of economies of scale, are they put at a disadvantage really because the profits that they're making from their country are taxed?
If you're a retail trade in Panama, yes, you pay corporate tax rates because you're selling in Panama. But the same benefits are there. You don't have to be in the free zone to enjoy the benefits of being able to sell internationally. If you're in Panama City in an office and you're buying in China and selling in the Dominican Republic, your profits are also tax-free. So if you've got an idea and you're an entrepreneur and you, like several people that I know that will hop on a plane and go to China and they found something that is incredible and they think they can do something with that, they'll start buying, they'll bring it to the free zone, and they'll be selling. So again, it depends on what do you want to stay domestic retail, or you want to think big and be international. So there's no barriers to doing international business in Panama wherever you are in the country. Yes, sir.
So if you break down the wall and extend the free zone, wouldn't that just take all those residential areas and turn them into businesses? And then where would people live in the first place?
The project contemplates 3 stories. And the idea is that the ground floor can be retail. The upper floor, my idea is, imagine King Street in Colan, where the ground floor is retail, the second floor is office space, and the third floor is residential. And our plan, certainly, there's the issue, some people say that's going to be gentrification because it's going to become too expensive for those people to stay there. But I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I would point to the public housing that you can see right down 2 or 3 blocks away from here, where at some point people realize that it's a good idea to be able to have affordable housing nearby where business is happening, so that you can have all manner of housing available for people. So yes, that's an issue that we've contemplated, and it goes against the grain with other projects where people have just basically said, let's bulldoze and continue building warehouses into the city. That's not my view of what we want to do, is because what we want to do is create an area that would enjoy the incentives to allow for a vibrant community of people who are architects who want to be able to establish themselves there and enjoy the benefits of being there, so that those incentives are even greater than staying in Panama City. And through that private investment, you'll be able to recover what is right now a pretty bombed out place. That was too easy. Yes, sir.
Out of all the speakers that we've had, I would say that you focus more on the aspects of community and promoting a social well-being in everything that you do. With that, I feel like you have a lot of people. You're putting a team on your back. And so ethically, I feel like you would run into a lot of decision-making, processes. And I would like to know where you start in your ethical decision-making process.
That was a good one. Ethics in business. That's a whole course. Ethics in business, the morality of capitalism. That's a great book. Tom Palmer wrote a book, and I'm sure Pete can get a hold of some copies of the morality of capitalism. Capitalism forces you to be moral because trade means I've got something, and if you want it, you want to buy it from me, but you have to want to buy it from me, and if you don't want it, you're not going to buy it from me. And if I don't have a very good product, you're not going to buy it from me, and there's not going to be an exchange that will occur as a result of that. So a market-based system enforces a system of ethics because, yeah, I can pull the wool over you and I'll sell you a piece of crap the first time, but I'm not going to sell a second piece because it's not going to work. So when you talk about ethics and morality in business, what you're doing is you've got a reputation that you need to preserve. And if you don't provide a good service or if you're corrupt, your reputation is going to suffer. So I would propose that the ethics are born of the desire. What's that saying about the candle maker, the baker? They don't do it.
Not with the benevolence of the butcher or the baker that they produce their wares, but only for their own self-love.
It's not from the benevolence that the butcher and the baker work at 4 a.m. to make bread for you. They want to make sure that you'll come in because that's the best damn bread that you've ever had, and you want to come back tomorrow and buy it again. And that's where their success is going to come from, because they're producing a damn good bread. So I don't know if that answers it. My personal ethics are, I'm Christian, and I believe that we're born to toil. We were talking about it at lunch, that once we were expelled out of the Garden of Eden, unfortunately our lot is to work. And so we have to work, and if we're going to work, might as well be good at it, because I enjoy the ability to be able to travel, and if I didn't make money, I wouldn't be able to buy a ticket. So therefore, I need to be good at what I do. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering what you think about, is the free trade zone limited because of the physical geography and given the growth in Latin America? I mean, how much is there left to expand?
Excellent question. The free zone as it exists right now, this is the first one, 1948, as I said, started right here in a little bitty area of the city. This is the city of Milan, and it started here, and now it's here, and yeah, we're running out of space. But my vision, and that's a project that I'm working on right now, is the airport, the international airport. I want to do a copy-paste Well, there's no advantage if there's no duties on those goods. Why have a free zone? No. Procter & Gamble, I think, reaffirms the reason why you need a free zone is because those goods need to come together in one place, and it makes sense logistically from a supply chain perspective to bring those goods into a regional distribution center to ship them back out. So regardless of the trade benefits, the physical benefits exist there for a consolidation point for those goods to come together to be re-exported. I don't know if that addresses your concern. Yes, sir.
Yes, I was reading some recent studies on the ports in the United States and whether they're going to be ready for what they're calling new post-Panamax ships, which is up to
12,000, 13,000 TEUs.
They're now saying right under 14,000 TEUs, and because they're talking about relaxing the size of the ships and the dimensions, and those larger ships come through. But at any rate, you're going to become a major transshipment center. Your ports that you've outlined around there. Isn't that going to create a lot of jobs for people?
That's certainly what we hope so. We're again, and this is one of the things that the fact that right now the maximum TEU vessel that can go through the canal is 4,000 TEUs. We're going to go up to 13,000 TEUs. What does that mean? Yes, you're tripling the capacity, but that doesn't mean the trade is going to triple. At the end of the day, those containers are only going to move if there's demand, and so what needs to happen for that to occur is that you guys have to buy more stuff, which needs to be manufactured so that it needs to be moved over here. So the jobs are going to come as a result of economic growth. So the ports are already investing. They're putting in major, this port, we're associated with this port, and this berth right here, these are post-Panamax cranes that are already waiting for those vessels to come in. So they're ready to handle them. And we as third-party logistics operators are certainly also very interested in being able to bring more companies like a Procter & Gamble. What that's going to mean is another 100 jobs within our company. Yes?
Out of all the ports in America, or I guess on the East Coast, who is most online with these mega ships?
The jury's still out on that. I don't know that anybody has decided because the logical place is Port Elizabeth in Newark. But they've got a big problem with the Bayonne Bridge. It's a bridge that will not allow for those vessels to go underneath. And I understand Governor Christie has successfully lobbied for, I don't know, some outrageous sum that's going to be needed to raise the Bayonne Bridge. If that happens, it might be Port Elizabeth, because the number one port in America right now is LA Long Beach. But the second port I would propose is Port Elizabeth. So if they get to raise the Bayonne Bridge, that might be a slam dunk for their opportunity at being the go-to port for those post-Panamax vessels going through the canal. Yes, sir.
I noticed there's a certain amount of movement in Nicaragua to build a canal. I was wondering if you had any thoughts or insights on whether that could ever happen.
That's a public relations coup, I would say. A 40-year-old Chinese billionaire of dubious origin has successfully established himself in Nicaragua and become buddies with Daniel Ortega. Anybody who knows their history from the days of the Sandinistas in the 80s with Oliver North and the Daniel Ortega, the revolutionary, to Daniel Ortega, the capitalist today. It's quite an interesting way to see how he's progressed in his thinking with regards to the almighty dollar. So to your point of the question, the Panama Canal Authority commissioned a study, and the route that they've explained that they want to take is going to make it financially unfeasible. So it's very important to understand in the story that it's a Chinese businessman who on his own says he wants to do it. It's not the Chinese government who said they want to do it. And His lowball estimate is 40 billion. The Panama Canal Authority I want to get my number right, over 150 miles versus our 50 miles. And the fact that you have a lake doesn't mean that you've got it easy in the lake, because you still have to dredge the lake to be able to have the draft for those larger vessels, which is 45 feet. So you're talking about an enormous undertaking, and my personal take on what that means is that he's basically waiving the Canal Expansion over there to get favorable treatment on probably a big portfolio of other projects that he'd like to get done in Nicaragua that will probably result in probably more money. But he's got all the publicity already, so he's a very popular guy in Nicaragua right now. Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the Charter City movement in Honduras?
Yes, sir. I was just talking to Guillermo Peña this morning, as a matter of fact. It's a project that is sponsored by the Universidad Francisco Marroquín in Guatemala. And I would point you to, we're calling it, it's not Free Cities anymore, we changed it to Startup Cities, is the name of the movement. And that's what I'm trying to do here in the city of Colón, is create the environment. And Michael Strong is one of the gentlemen who is very instrumental in creating the Startup Cities movement in Honduras. And basically what they're trying to do there is create the incentives, much like what happened in 1948 here, so that people will come in and invest and create the infrastructure that will create development in Honduras. As you probably well know, Honduras is one of the poorer countries in Central America, and they're desperate to try and figure out something, because they know that government over the last 60 years has not allowed for the development to occur. So the Startup Cities movement is trying to inject a component of the private market into creating the incentives that will create wealth and development.
Yeah, I had, it's been a couple of years since I've talked to him, but a friend of mine, Patrick Friedman.
Patrick, yeah.
Do you know Patrick?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this guy is the grandson of Milton Friedman. He was partnered up with Peter Thiel, who was the founder.
They had a falling out, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, I haven't talked to him.
There's you'll find that in the movement, there's a lot of people, and Patrick Friedman is doing seasteading now. That's the thing that he's big on. And I don't know if you've read anything about creating an offshore platform because of the B-1B visa restrictions for typically Indian tech guys who can't get visas, and Silicon Valley needs this talent. So what they're doing is they're saying, okay, you can live offshore and then you'll be able to commute, and then that way we can get around the visa restrictions. So Patrick Friedman today is more involved in seasteading. And so Michael Strong is leading up the effort, along with Mark Klugman, who were two people who I was with 2 months ago in Guatemala. So it's an interesting project, but when I talked about this, I was there at the Startup Cities weekend, and I successfully competed for one of the 6 tables to pitch to the group, and I kicked Honduras' ass. I got first place.
Just an unrelated question, but back to what y'all been doing in Panama. You have these free trade districts, free zone districts, I understand. But is it really the free market at work here? Because you have this, it seems like state capitalism. You have the state working with this corporation on these big infrastructure projects.
It's closer to a free market, but there's no free market. I mean, outside of Hong Kong, unfortunately, there's not very many places that are free market. So you're absolutely right. It's the state owns the land. We rent the land, and we pay the state for the land, and they then have the laws. And unfortunately, what's happened is that the laws have become less open over time precisely because of the success, because what it's created is a lot of resentment, and one of the questions was, what about the local economy versus you guys? And what our free zone attracts are people from other places who are looking for opportunities and become very successful at it, and so that wealth that's generated creates resentment. So the success has created, as a result of that success, resentment against the free zones, and that's part of the challenge that I face as a Free Zone Users Association, is to defend the free zone with the government, because the government says, you guys are making way too much money and we should tax you a little bit more. What a strange thing for a politician to say. Yes, ma'am.
From a leadership perspective, it seems like someone in your position has to use a lot of influence. What do you think makes you a successful influencer as a leader?
Humility. Humility is the main reason. And one of my favorite sayings is that it's amazing what things can get done when nobody worries about who takes credit for it. And so what's important is to create sincere respect for an opposing view, and to be able to try and negotiate and build a bridge so that your point of view can, in a way, get accepted. So it's a lot of talking, it's a lot of negotiation, it's a lot of convincing, but it's a lot of humility, because what happens is when the ego gets in the way, that's when it all blows up. So I think humility is super important, and I love how people say, I make business decisions depending on how that guy that I'm having the meeting with treats the waitstaff. That shows a lot about what a person thinks about their fellow human beings. I was a waiter in college. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's important to mention too, like the environmental negative externalities with expanding Panama Canal, especially with like non-native species to the Caribbean, such as sea snakes coming from the Pacific. I mean, what is the protocol kind of with other countries, like influencing Panama?
The original canal, we're actually building the expansion in an existing area that was dug out around the late 30s by the Army Corps of Engineers. And so the issue of species crossing from one side to the other has been around for the 100 years, almost 100 years that the canal has existed. So adding these locks is really, as far as degradation, the footprint of where those locks are going is an area that was already semi-developed. So from an environmental impact study perspective, yes, there's been a lot of rock that's been dug out, there's been a lot of dredging, but the effects have been minimal. And from a cross-ocean species perspective, it's a freshwater lake, and it's two salty oceans, and it's very rare that you're going to have a species that will be able to survive were they to make it up to the lake level through those locks. Does that answer it? You're still thinking? Yes, sir.
So say these mega ships start going through Panama and up to Newark. What kind of effect will that have on the Charleston port's volume of business? Will we see a lot less business in Charleston since we can't support the mega ships?
Not necessarily, because what's going to happen is that it will be an increased traffic, and this is something that Pete and I were talking about. Perhaps what that's going to mean is that trade will increase around Port Elizabeth, but there's still be demand in Charleston, so why can't some of those containers come down here, say on a feeder ship, so that they can then be taken up into the regional economy? So I don't necessarily say that, and you have to be careful about who is lobbying for Charleston to be successful, and I don't want to step on any toes, but one of my pet peeves is cronyism. Who is it that's trying to influence government, and what is the ulterior motive? Is it the greater good, or is it personal profit? Because it's much easier to lobby a politician than it is to compete in the market. So cronyism is one of the the downsides of capitalism that we have to be really careful about. So to your point, I would say that it doesn't necessarily mean that because Port Elizabeth wins, Charleston loses. That's not true. You know, maybe there are other things that can happen. And this is something that I was struggling because Pete and I, you know, I voiced an opinion that Pete rebutted very effectively, and so he scrambled my brain. So you have to continue reading every day. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, just a few days ago, China established a new free zone in Shanghai. So I'm curious about your opinion of how the Shanghai free zone going to influence the Hong Kong free zone.
And then yesterday I read an article about how they immediately put in a law that restricted about 50 different occupations that could be done in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. So unfortunately, what I've seen is that the Chinese government is in fits and starts trying or recognizing that economic freedom is important, but it has to be accompanied with political freedom. And so one of the big challenges is that they realize is that as a result of the fact, as I mentioned earlier, many factories are leaving China because it's expensive now to produce in China because they've been very successful and they're actually running out of people to be able to continue, so they're trying to shift to the domestic rather than the export-based economy. So what that has meant is that as people gain more wealth and start going out and start traveling, you come back and you start feeling that the restrictions, the political restrictions, and I would propose that political freedom goes hand in hand with economic freedom. And so they're a little bit reluctant, and we're certainly seeing that in Cuba. Raul Castro will not allow for capitalism to develop on the island other than a safety valve to try and keep social pressure down, because he knows that that would spell the end of his regime. Yes, sir.
I want to revisit your comment about cronyism, because I share your pet peeve. But again, it seems like I'll go back to the system of state capitalism, that you're building this infrastructure that benefits these international corporations and shippers, effectively subsidizing them in their shipping needs. And this young woman who asked the question earlier about undermining local business, I mean, are there limits? Do you see any limits to the degree that the state can get in and provide this infrastructure for these international corporations?
I think we're seeing the limits from the sense that you can't continue to spend without it being sustainable. And I'm totally in agreement with is a place where you're seeing less state capitalism and more free market capitalism. And those experiments at trying to become a higher ranked in the Economic Freedom Index are the success stories. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but the United States in the 2013 index ranked number 17, and 15 years ago they were number 3.
We've got time for one more question.
One more question. Yes, sir.
I want to echo your comments about the increasing need for decentralizing of government regulation. I think that's an important point. But I want to ask a question. This may sound really naive, and I don't really know a lot about this, but what is the benefit for a region or state or a local area of having a port like Charleston? I mean, as a driver, I see the disadvantage. I mean, the trucks just barreling down the highway and the congestion. How do we benefit from having a port? Because most of it gets on a railway or on an intermodal on the truck. So when they leave the area, maybe they go to different parts of the state, but they are going to different areas, different states in the region. Is the government getting money off, or do they get, like, what's the benefit?
It's not a naive question because I don't have an answer. But ports, in general, Guns, Germs, and Steel. Jared Diamond, I would point you to that book. That's a tremendous book. But places that have ports will do better economically than places who don't have ports. And so a port is just merely a way, a point of entry into a region to be able to move goods in and out. And logic would suggest that if you have a port of entry, you're going to create economic growth, which will then create development. So I don't have an answer for that. Those goods maybe are just going through, and it's just a few longshoremen who are benefiting from it. I would say that LA Long Beach is suffering from the fact that they are so successful that the longshoremen had a very effective strike that basically took them off the map, and so trade flows are dropping off in LA Long Beach, and that should be of concern for both the cities of LA as well as Long Beach, because they realize that they depend a lot on their ports. And what that percentage of dependency is going to vary based on what can happen around that. And that's why this is pretty cool, is because you've got the canal, and then you've got 1, 2, 3 ports. There's another one coming up along here. There's a $100 million airport. There's a railroad over here, and then there's a 4-lane road, and 30,000 people working in this area. So it concentrates a lot of economic development in one single area. So I guess with that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity, and I hope you learned something.